Essential Self-Care Podcast, a podcast for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. In this podcast, you will hear real life stories from people who leaned into their self-care as they were navigating life's storms. You'll learn practical tips, tools, and strategies to incorporate self-care into your own busy life as well. You'll hear from expert guests sharing their expertise on specific tools and modalities of self-care to optimize your well-being in your life, career, and relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. I am a physician, best-selling author, and founder of Radiant Living Institute, where I guide high-achieving women to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again through major life transitions. Quick disclaimer before we dive into the episode, please know that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always seek the advice of your own health practitioner or mental health provider for your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I am so excited to be joined in the podcast studio again with my dear friend, Jelisha Gatling. Jelisha is a licensed marriage family therapist here in Hampton Roads. She's the founder of Let's Unpack Therapy, where she provides couples counseling as well as premarital counseling. And so I am so excited because she's going to share a bit of her expertise in working with couples, in working with enhancing communication within relationships. And so I am really excited. Thank you so much for being here today, Jelisha.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jelisha and I always have the best conversations. So I am really excited to dive in today. And, the reason I wanted to bring you on today and to really have this conversation is because relationships are just such an important part of our life. I mean, we talk about, this show is essential self-care, right? We talk about self-care. We talk about those things that we do need to do to resource ourselves, right? And there's so many aspects to self-care, right? There is looking at, all the different dimensions of us as humans, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and part of that is also relational. Like we are relational beings. We are social creatures. And so relationships are important. And that's why I wanted to, and we all desire healthy relationships. We all desire relationships where we feel nourished and loved and accepted for who we are. And so I'm just excited to dive into that. And that was, one of the main reasons that I wanted to hopefully this may be, the first of many more conversations that we have on this show, diving into relationships. I can't say first, actually, we did have an Angel Myers last year, also a local marriage therapist who we did talk a little bit about relationships there, but hopefully we'll continue to have conversations around this. And so to get started, what I'm curious about is what do you see as, within your office, with the couples that you work with, what do you see as some of the sort of main issues revolving around communication? So we're going to focus on communication today. So what do you see as kind of the obstacles or challenges most often coming into your office?
Yeah. So a lot of the couples I work with, they lead with, we need help with communication. They're not listening. They can't hear me. That's like the top thing I hear. And so everyone feels not heard, essentially. And I find that they're stuck in this loop where they really focus in on the content and they want me to know every single detail of who said what, when, just sort of rehashing things. And I'm talking about couples that are finding themselves bickering a lot. They're fighting a lot, but they don't know what they're fighting about. They're just like kind of going at each other. And so in that instance, I really like to reroute them away from rehashing the details and essentially telling them, hey, I don't need to know every single detail of who said what and how they said it. I mean, they can get into the intricacies of the details. And to kind of simplify it, I bring in what's called compassionate communication. This is also known as nonviolent communication. Those two can be used interchangeably if you look this up. But compassionate communication, essentially, if I kind of simplify it, is identifying what is it that you're feeling? Each partner, what are you feeling? And I mean in a really nuanced way, not like I'm feeling bad, I'm upset, but like really like what are you feeling? Maybe there's embarrassment, maybe there's disappointment, a feeling of betrayal. And what do you need? And so essentially, I guess the ultimate sort of the meaning of compassionate communication is that we all have needs that are met or unmet. And those are always associated with a feeling. And so it really is taking the attention away from your partner and what they're doing, what they're not doing, the blaming, the criticism, and getting out of that cycle and turning inward and saying, okay, what am I feeling right now? And really tapping into that. And sometimes that question alone is hard for people to answer.
Yeah, well, because when you were saying that, what I was even thinking about is, there's such a range of feelings
Yeah.
and emotions that exist. But I think generally for many of us, unless we've done like a really deep dive into, kind of these emotional spectrums and different emotions, is generally we have a very limited, like, I don't know how many, but like a handful of emotions maybe that we
Yeah.
would turn to, of having a vocabulary for.
Mhm.
So like the examples that you gave, if someone says, like, I could imagine that, I could see that, of like, I feel bad, like, but that might just be the only word in
Yeah.
kind of our emotional vocabulary for someone to describe how they're feeling. So
Yes.
even getting to the point of, okay, well, what does bad really mean to you? What is
Mhm.
that feeling? Because that could be bad, could be, I feel angry, I
Mhm.
feel embarrassed,
Yeah.
I feel frustrated, I feel irritated, right? Like there's so many, or I feel sad,
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
right?
I feel abandoned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it could feel so many things. So I'm assuming, well, I'm not assuming, I'm going to ask you, is that part of the first step with you when you are working with couples, of like
Oh,
do you see that often,
absolutely.
of working, or of needing to kind of guide them to that
Oh,
place?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, many of us haven't been taught,
Yeah. And
to
so how do you do that? Like, for someone who's listening, who's like, yeah, I resonate with that. Like, I don't know how to identify my feelings, or I
Mhm.
only have like two words. I feel good or I feel bad.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Like, how would, and obviously nothing takes the place of obviously working with someone
Mhm.
one on one. I mean, that is definitely going to be the key. But is there kind of a general way that you would recommend for someone to start to expand their emotional vocabulary?
Yes. I mean, honestly, I have a little cheat sheet that I like. It's a feelings chart. You may have
Hmm.
seen this or
Hmm.
come across it,
Yeah.
but it has a whole range of emotions, and it's like a little onion, and it goes from sort of vague to very specific, and they have different colors like rage, anger, compassionate, numb. I wish I had it in front of me, but literally I will give this to my clients
Mhm.
and just say, take a look at this, like literally. And a lot of times they're like, oh, this is what I feel. um Aside from that, I might even just sort of, I'm pretty intuitive, and I can read people pretty well, and so I tend to just throw out, does it feel like this or that? I'll literally kind of put out what I think they may be feeling, with a place of like curiosity, like
Mhm.
total, curiosity, not telling them, but just sort of, yeah, putting something out there, and also inviting their partner to like be curious about what they might be feeling. So a big
Yeah.
part of this is curiosity, and not, beating yourself up if you don't know right off the bat, or if you need some time because this is a
Yeah.
new thing.
Yeah.
But using some sort of chart, like I said, there's one on the website, and maybe you might put this in the notes that I could provide, that they have a really lovely, a couple pages of sheets that have a bunch of different feelings, very nuanced, and nuanced needs, which we'll, I guess, move
Mhm.
into in a moment.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. I love that. Thank you for bringing that up, because, I can say, and so also one thing, if you are listening and you're like, I have a very limited range of words that I use to describe my emotions. I think knowing that you're not alone, knowing that that doesn't mean that there's
Mhm.
anything wrong with you by any means, that is actually very common.
Yes.
And I remember, I don't think I was really aware of this until, gosh, it may have been, I don't know. It was a few years ago, maybe like somewhere between 6 to 8 years ago, I think, that I became aware of this too. Like
Mhm.
I'd been going to a lot of like personal development seminars and things like that. And that's where I first kind of came to realization of this too, that was certainly the case for me. And there were charts, right? Like I found these
Mhm.
charts. I think they were given to us during the personal development seminar, and then also just online. And there's also lots of apps now too,
Yep.
where you can kind of like track your emotions and your mood. And
Yeah.
they have lots of also like kind of color
Yeah.
coded, and also different names of different emotions. So, I mean, all these resources are out there for a reason. It's because you're not alone, because this is a very
Absolutely.
common
Yes.
thing. And like I said, it wasn't brought to my awareness until maybe about 6 to 8 years ago. And it was a similar thing too, of then just like looking at a chart and being like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
there's actually a really big range of
Oh, yeah.
emotions, and I kind of use the same words to describe it all the
Yeah.
time. And so it's really interesting, and definitely something I could go back to and look at again as well. So yes, we will definitely include the link, any links that you provide, in the show notes as well. Something else I wanted to go back to, I was taking some notes while you were chatting, that you had said earlier was that when couples come in, they are specifically focused on that content,
Mhm.
right? Like the very specific details and nuances, right?
Yes.
But here's the thing, and correct me if I'm wrong. You're the expert in this, not me, but so correct me if I'm wrong. But it's so rarely the actual content as the
It's
issue,
never about it.
right?
Yeah.
It's never about it. Like it's never about the dishes.
Mm-mm. No,
You know,
no,
it's about
no,
the dishes. Okay, maybe a teeny part is about the
no.
dishes, but that's usually a teeny part.
Yeah, it's easier though to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
Rather than to go inward and say, "Hey, I feel unappreciated. I feel
Yeah.
overlooked. I feel taken for granted.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
where are you? I miss you. Or do you see me?"
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And so then I think that now leads into the needs.
Yeah.
So tell
Mhm.
us about that. Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Reclaim Your Radiance, Radiant Living Institute's signature coaching program designed to help you reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. This 6-module curriculum has already helped countless women rediscover themselves through life's storms. From setting difficult boundaries within toxic relationships, to finding their inner strength and power while navigating divorce and co parenting, to aligning their career and business with their authentic self, and to learning how to live for themselves again after their kids have left the nest. This program has been a guiding force for women to live unapologetically and shine brightly within their lives once again, or often, even for the first time ever. Experience the results for yourself. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com/reclaim your radiance to learn more and get started.
So the needs, essentially, it makes you think about. Well, you want to again go inward and really think about. Okay, what do I need? Like, what I might say, what do you hope to get out of this conversation or walk away from? What do you want your partner to understand? But it could be as simple as, I need a hug. Like, I feel like you haven't touched me, or we haven't kissed. I don't feel desired. And so that could then lead into, okay, let's have a date night this weekend, or let's put something on the calendar to go away. It doesn't have to necessarily meet that need in the moment, but to acknowledge it and then say, okay, this is a step that I'm going to do to help fulfill this need. It could also be, I need space. Like, I need space. I need to take a walk right now. Actually, I'm overwhelmed with the kids. I haven't had a break from work all day. And, perhaps the capacity for anything more, your partner coming in and saying, "Hey, what's for dinner?" just sets you off.
Mhm.
So it's like recognizing, what do you need? Can your partner help with that need? Or is it something that you have to fulfill yourself? So it's
Mhm.
not always something that you necessarily get or need from your partner. And it's not always something that you get right there. But that
Mhm.
acknowledgement of it is so important and can be really meaningful, because it's like, okay, you see me, you hear me, you validate my needs. It could be, I'm hungry. So it doesn't have to be like super deep or really elaborate.
Mhm.
It could be so many things, but it's also sometimes taking a step back and just looking at the context. I'll say, what happened in your day? What were you doing before that? Had you eaten? How did you
Mhm.
sleep?
Yeah.
you know?
And so often we don't think about that,
Yeah.
right? Like so often we don't think about that. Like, oh yeah, I am just really hungry.
Yeah.
Like
I can't tell you how
that's
many
all
times
it
that's
is, you know?
happened.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've been working all day and I didn't take a break to eat. Oh, okay. That could be it, you know? But a few things I love everything that you shared there. You know, a few things that I want to just kind of highlight and draw attention to. One is the acknowledging.
Mhm.
Acknowledging it yourself, and then also um I guess
Your partner
rec-
honoring that. Like,
yes, your partner, right? Like, I don't know, asking your partner to acknowledge that or receiving that acknowledgement from your partner. I don't know. You
yeah,
probably work
well,
with,
maybe sort of like guide the other partner. Can
yeah,
you kind of reflect back what you just heard them
yeah,
say? Just having someone mirror back what you said, one, it allows you to clarify that you've heard them because sometimes you hear something different.
mhm,
So it clarifies and confirms, okay, that's what you're saying. And then your partner can say, yeah, you got it. Or they can say, actually, you missed something. This is really what I want to emphasize.
mhm,
So just like literally, I'll say, what did you hear them say? What are you taking away from that? What's the message? Not verbatim, but what's
yeah,
the message that you're getting from that to make sure that they are hearing what the partner is actually saying?
yeah,
And that's huge. It's everything. And you can
absolutely.
see the
Because that goes
energy.
back to what you had started with of like, we all want to feel heard.
Yeah.
Right. It goes back to that, what you had started with initially, and acknowledging it allows you to feel heard. And I
Yeah.
think it is acknowledging it on both levels, though.
Mm,
Acknowledging it with yourself, allowing
absolutely.
yourself to feel heard, like giving yourself that, I
Yes.
think is so important. And I perhaps the most important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then also, you know, relationally having that acknowledgement and feeling heard from your partner, right?
Yes.
And and then the second step to that was action, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I wrote down the words acknowledge and action, right?
Yes.
Like there's the acknowledgement piece, which is important. And then what is the action that needs to be taken or not taken there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the action is rest, right? So maybe that doesn't feel like an action, but that is you
Yeah.
actually doing something, right? And or maybe that action is having some space, right? So maybe that's not, you know, maybe someone wouldn't think of that as an action, but that is an
Yeah.
action, right? So what is the, you know, so one acknowledging and then two action as well.
Mm-hmm.
At least for the second part of the
Yes.
needs aspect, right? And so so I love that. So we talked about, you know, one, it is rarely ever the actual content that you
Yeah.
are arguing about or bickering about.
Yeah.
There's often, more often than not, something else underlying that. And to start with that, it does require coming to yourself
Mm-hmm.
first and increasing that self awareness of what am I feeling? And these going to these two questions: what am I feeling? And what do I need?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that feeling helps, you know, that feeling helps you get to that need, to identifying that need,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So another pet peeve of mine, I think I shared a pet peeve on the last episode. So another pet peeve of mine, and this is where I would say that my approach is different than, I know, should I say this? Okay.
Let's do
So
it.
I think this is where my approach is different than a lot of other coaches who I've met. And I didn't go through a traditional coaching process because of that, right? Like my background is I'm a physician and I'm a specialist in mind body practices and Ayurveda. And so, but one of my pet peeves is so often what I've heard, and this may be a limited understanding on my part, but what I often have heard is like continuing to go back to this idea of feelings are not facts. And yes, they are not facts. But that doesn't mean to that feelings aren't important. And I
Yes.
feel like that's a message that I have seen come across through some other coaches and coaching sort of thought leadership and I just disagree with that
Mhm.
because I think feelings are so important. I think feelings are a way they are signals and they are messages to what you need. They are messages to what your values are. They are
Yes.
messages to, you know, your boundaries being crossed.
Mhm.
Like so many of us fear getting angry, right? Or judge ourselves for feeling angry. I have done that. That used to be a pattern of mine.
Yeah, I can resonate.
And I
Absolutely.
really did a lot of work to work through that, because what I realized was like, no, for me, that anger, and when I'm talking about relationally, that anger would come up when a boundary was
Mm.
crossed.
Mm-hmm.
But how would I know, right? Like, how would you know that that was a boundary that you need to set unless you had that emotional signal of like, wait, that did not sit right with me.
Yes,
Right. So I think it's
absolutely.
important. I think even those hard, quote unquote, negative emotions, I think are just so important.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
And
I
that will lead you to your
totally.
need. That will lead you to identifying your need. And then through work and through process and through, I think, guidance. We talked about that before also on the last episode that you were on, about how even us both being in healing professions and fields, like we need others to help reflect that back to us.
Absolutely.
Like we all need that,
Yes.
and so it can be hard to try to figure this all out on your own, right? Even if you work in the field, maybe
Mm-hmm.
even more so if you work in the field, because if you work in the field, it's like, oh, I know this, I got this, right? I see this all the time with my colleagues, right? And so it can almost be harder,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
agree. Oh my gosh. I always say I never trust a therapist that doesn't have a therapist. I say that's just
Yeah.
my personal thing. I'm like, are you in therapy? What
Yeah.
is their name? I'm joking. I don't go that far. But seriously, yeah.
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 Oh,
Yeah.
but the beautiful thing about this is it's not just about um getting that need met and having that conflict sort of dissipate. It's really, like you said, it's a beautiful chance to really understand what you value and what your partner values. If I'm angry, you've done something or said something that is threatening something that is important to me. It's probably threatening to a value. And that can take some time to unpack and even identify, but it can be really eye opening and bring you closer to your partner and just better understanding them and yourself, like what you
Yeah.
stand for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I want to close out with this idea and this thought here, the story that I want to share
Okay.
with you and our listeners. And that is also, I was at a party, it was a few months ago, and I was just standing at this table chatting with a bunch of other women, and they were just so openly sharing their experiences in a couples therapy and how much they love going to couples therapy and they go regularly. And I was so happy to hear this conversation, that it was just being so openly talked about at a party.
Mm.
Because I think also there's this perception still. I think this perception and stigma, which I think we are moving away from now. And this is why I was so excited to hear this conversation,
Mhm.
is this perception or stigma that there's something wrong with your relationship if you're going to couples therapy. And I think it's important to normalize the fact that this is just an opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves, an opportunity to learn more about your partner, that it doesn't mean that there's something necessarily quote unquote wrong
Right.
with you or with the relationship, and that both partners are invested in cultivating the healthiest relationship possible. And so that's why I was really excited to hear that conversation at a
Mhm.
part, just being so openly talked about at a party, and they were comparing their stories, and from their therapy sessions, because I think just normalizing that, and
Yeah,
and I think that's important. So
absolutely.
yeah, any thought? I'd love to hear any other sort of
I
reflections or thoughts or insights on
I
that as we wrap up.
I agree with you 100%. And it's something that I feel I get a lot of fulfillment from kind of helping to undo like some of those narratives because a lot of people still come in like that, like, and it's like, no, 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 this is not, nothing is wrong with you. I mean, we don't shame ourselves for going to the dentist or for having, the roofer fix my, like, we get help in so many other areas. And I wish that we would look at our relationships as a healthy. I wish we would take our relationships in the same way that we do our physical health
Yeah,
and checkups and all those things. It's if you really think about it, we get so much support. We're not doing really anything on our own, and that's
yeah,
okay. Like
yeah.
we're relational
Exactly,
beings.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. You know, the last episode that you were on, we mentioned, and we didn't dive into it because there was just so much more we could. There was just so much we could dive into. But you had mentioned the importance of community. You
Hmm.
know, and I agree with that too. Like community is so important, and just kind of coming around full circle to kind of the intro when we started this episode. That yes, we are relational beings, and as you just mentioned, and the example that you gave, you know, we look at all these other aspects of our health, our well-being, our self-care, and that's why it's really important to me to bring on some episodes with experts within our, you know, within relationships,
Hmm.
within our you know, interpersonal dynamics
Hmm.
onto this show, because that is part of our self-care too. You know, that
Absolutely.
is part of our self-care. So you are doing amazing work. Can you
Thank
please
you.
tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and the work that you're doing? Can you also please share, if someone wants to come work with you specifically, do you work with clients locally, virtually?
Mhm.
Please tell us a little
Oh,
bit
sure.
more.
Yeah. Well, you can find me at letsunpacktherapy.com. That's my website where you can get in touch with me and see more about my services. I primarily work with couples. Um, uh, Premarital counseling is really my niche, but I do work with couples that have low conflict or kind of are bickering. Maybe you're feeling like you're sort of roommates. I've also have a specialty in betrayal trauma if you've experienced any of that in your relationship. Yeah, I love working with couples. If you have a partner who is like, I don't want to go to therapy, I will convert them. Just get on a consultation. I'm seriously, I've done it with so many people and I'm very proud of it. I've made people pro therapy that you thought would never go. So if you have a partner and you're like, they're kicking and screaming, just do a consultation. It's 15 minutes and let's see, how we vibe.
Yeah, just do it. I will include the links in the show notes below. Thank you so much for being here. I always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Essential Self Care Podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a positive review, and share this episode with someone you know. And remember, your free guide, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life, is waiting for you at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Download it today.